So I made a video last week reviewing Daggerheart, and I got a lot of comments asking me a lot of questions, and some comments that were just statements aimed at me. So I figured I would answer a few of them here first. But one comment that did come up a lot was from people suggesting that I do not in fact prefer GMing Daggerheart. I just prefer a more laid-back, improvised style of play that I can do in D&D 2, therefore my Daggerheart review is void, and Daggerheart is not, in fact, a good system. So before we get into the other questions, I do want to address this first and clarify a few things. So I just want to outline a few things about Daggerheart that I do really like. There are a lot more than these I'm mentioning here, but these are the main ones that come to mind right now. And they are kind of what I was talking about in my last video. The first is that my players tend to collaborate more with each other and me, the GM, than in, say, a game of D&D. I like that. I can rely on them to take some of the cognitive load off of me, and they're just working together as a team more. The second thing I like is that Daggerheart has a more improvisational nature, meaning I can do less prep, and I don't know where the story is going to go. It's more unpredictable, which I also enjoy. The third thing is that the GM having resources and the more collaborative nature of the game tends to make me feel more like a player than like some GM god who is just like the arbiter of everything, which I also like. And I understand that it may sound like all these things are more to just do with my GM style and the player's playstyle than the system itself. I can of course just play a more collaborative game of D&D, one more improvisational and one where I play more like a player than a GM, but this isn't the case. The systems in Daggerheart actually encourage this playstyle from both the GM and the players. I can play in this way I love playing much more effortlessly. This isn't me actively changing the way I play or GM to suit this playstyle more. This is kind of the default natural playstyle that the game encourages. So I do this without thinking. For example, my first point about the players collaborating more, it's not just that the core rulebook pushes this, but it's also written into the abilities, with many being about helping out allies rather than just attacking a creature. It is also written into certain mechanics, such as helping allies being one of the main uses for hope points, or the tag team feature. There are even some abilities that ask the players to describe things or even create NPCs, not the GM. This is not playstyle, this is design. It's also taken into account in the difficulty of the game. For example, and I love D&D, I cannot stress this enough, there's nothing wrong with D&D, it's a great game if you like playing it. But in D&D, if the players consistently help each other by giving the help action, then the majority of rolls in the game would be done with advantage, giving a huge boost to the rolls. Advantage in D&D is overpowered, and it's great, but it's not supposed to happen on every single roll. Meaning if you were to play that way, the DM would have to genuinely make the DC a lot higher for most things, or the players would just walk all over the adventure. In Daggerheart, the game is designed so that you are constantly somehow getting a bonus, whether that's through experiences, or the help action, or advantage. Many abilities give you some kind of boost to rolls, and it can be seen by the actual rolling mechanic. In Daggerheart, you're way more likely to roll a 12 when you roll your 2d12s. That's the average roll. That's the one that's going to come up the most and around that area. Certainly in the earlier levels, most difficulties are going to lie around the 14, 15 area, like in tier 2. Meaning if the players mostly just rolled naked with no help from the other players or none of the bonuses they can get from the abilities, they're most likely going to fail most rolls. So to succeed most of the time, if the players have been playing for any amount of time, they're going to realize that they're going to be needing help from people. They're going to be wanting other players to help them with roles and collaborating and describing how they help. And that's just like one main example of that kind of collaboration between players that I prefer in Daggerheart. For my second point, that Daggerheart's improvisational nature means I can do less prep and the story is more unpredictable and exciting, well, this is tied into the hope and fear dice themselves and the fear mechanic, meaning the dice and myself take the story in random directions. But also in the core rulebook, it says to be narrative focused. And there is advice in the book about running a one-shot where you do zero prep and create the one-shot at the start of the session with the players. Now, you can do this in D&D, of course, but the Daggerheart book tells you how to run a game with zero prep, while the D&D Dungeon Master's Guide says you should prep for 1 to 3 hours. So I think that one alone tells you which one works best with and without lots of prep time. And my third point, the one where I feel more like a player having fun, well, that's actually not only because of points 1 and 2, but also the resources built into the game. resources TTRPGs like D&D simply do not have. Now, there are tons of other things I like about Daggerheart that is in the core rulebook, like adversaries and environments and countdowns and the simplification of a bunch of stuff like currency, abilities, distance, and arguably hit points, but you could argue with me about the last one. And I do like the complications of a few other things, like the addition of stress, hope, and armor slots. Well, the reality is D&D is very good at what it does, and Daggerheart is also very good at what it does. It does just come down to preference. I don't think there's much point in trying to play D&D more like Daggerheart, for me at least, or Daggerheart more like D&D, because, well, the games do themselves better. If you want to play a more tactical binary system with longer combat, where the GM holds all the power and you enjoy a longer prepping process, play D&D. If you want to play a faster-paced, more collaborative game that does not get as bogged down in the details, where the GM can do less work, if they choose to, play Daggerheart. If you like both games, play both games. You can of course take what you like from one and use it in the other if you want, but Daggerheart and D&D, for me, are two different experiences, and it's not just because of GM style. It's not just a mindset, it's by design. There's also a few comments in here about the fact that another creator released a video about their review of the game after 1 year of playing it, and as far as I can tell, they didn't enjoy it at all and will not be playing it moving forward. So I'm actually going to finish this video that I'm filming right now. I'm going to quickly edit, put it up, then I'm going to go live on Twitch and watch this other video of the GM who did not like it and give my thoughts on that. They might have some really good things to say. So go see if I'm still live and we can have a chat about all this stuff in more detail. Links below. Okay, now that that's out of our way, we can answer some other comments. So here I am in all my glory. I'll just go through and kind of cherry pick some comments that I want to talk about here. I'm going to try not to just go into defense mode, which sometimes I tend to just do accidentally. For example, when I read a comment like when I said, "Who wants to be a healer?" Nobody. Then 5 seconds earlier, I said, "One of my players really wanted to play a healer." Yeah, I kind of contradicted myself there. I'm pretty sure I meant it more like I think, and I've always thought, that nobody would want to play a healer. But then I found out that one of my players really wanted to play a healer, and that surprised me. You can cherry pick exactly what I say. People will do all the time, especially in a video where I'm kind of just talking train of thought. It's kind of a waste of a comment from you though. And there are a lot of comments in here where it's just people don't want Daggerheart to succeed, and they're just going out their way to like find reasons to hate on either it or me. And equally, there are people who don't really want Daggerheart to fail or anything like that. They just can't handle two things being true at the same time. For example, if I say, I prefer the combat in Daggerheart, I'm not saying that D&D combat is bad, If I say that I find Daggerheart more improvisational than other games, I'm not saying that D&D is not improvisational at all and can't be. But I think some people really deal with those definitives, and that can come out in the comments sometimes. So I'm going to hopefully not go into too many of those. But I do think it's also talking about people who I've just seen a few videos like this one. It's so interesting seeing how mixed the feelings actually are across the community. I've yet to test it myself, but not going to lie, I don't really plan to. I already know my table is way more into high stakes that other TTRPGs offer up in their mechanics, rather than always making it a narrative decision, which Daggerheart has built into its mechanics. So this is a really interesting comment for kind of two reasons. One is the first part. It's so interesting seeing how mixed the feelings actually are across the community. This is a very interesting thing, because when I first reviewed Daggerheart and saw a bunch of reviews come out when it first came out, they were overwhelmingly positive. A lot of negative reviews I saw were from people who benefited from Daggerheart not succeeding. Like there were people who maybe sold a lot of D&D content and wanted to sell more D&D content, or they were primarily D&D tubers. But even then, if I took all those into account, the majority, and I mean the majority of reviews that I personally saw, and I was scouring the web for them, were very positive. But algorithms are good, and that is very important to remember. So if you are getting a lot of negative reviews about Daggerheart, it probably means that you like watching them, which may point to you having a bias towards that. If you're getting a ton of positive reviews like me, maybe I'm biased because I enjoy the game. But often the difference is the people who are getting fed the negative reviews are the ones who have never tried to play it. So my positive biases are pushed by my positive experience with the game. But the negative biases that people are seeing and the algorithms therefore feeding them bad reviews are coming from no experience of the game. So I'm not saying that I'm more right than anyone else, that the game is, much more positively reviewed than negatively reviewed. by far, because I'd be saying the reviews you're seeing are skewed, but the ones I'm seeing are correct. I think they're skewed on both sides, but I'm still confident that I am more right. I do not believe that feelings are mixed across the community. Not from people who have actually tried playing the game. But like I said, after this, I'm going to watch some videos about people who didn't like the game, and it'll be interesting to see why they bounced off it. I have yet to test it myself, but not going to lie, I don't really plan to. Is just a funny thing to say on a review of the game, and you're then criticizing the game. Okay. And then I already know my table is way more into high stakes that other TTRPGs offer up in their mechanics. I actually don't get this at all. And I have genuinely found that every dice roll in Daggerheart is way, way, way more high stakes than D&D. Way more. So I would have to talk more to this person to see where they're coming from. Maybe it's more like they don't like kind of the rule of cool that start Daggerheart, or they want like solid mechanics, like, oh, if this happens, then this happens, and this happens, and there's nothing you can do about it. So once that chain reaction started, But I find everything from just standard rolls to combat to definitely death is much higher stakes. With Daggerheart being very high stakes when it comes to death. Like if a player gets knocked down and they're doing death saving or death moves, I should say, then the player has to make an incredibly dramatic and hard decision that, will most probably, with all the options they have, either end with death, end with a nerf to their character sheet forever, or end with the fight getting much, much harder for the players who stay up, increasing the chance of a TPK. Death in D&D to me is very kind of low stakes, especially if you have some potions about, especially if you have a healer about. So yeah, I'm not saying it's I just want, I'd want to know what you mean by high stakes. That's something I don't really understand too much. Then I've had a lot of positive comments from people who are enjoying Daggerheart and people who enjoy D&D and Daggerheart. And I really appreciate those comments. Thank you. We're on the same page. This person talks about prep time from a different kind of a view that I first talked about it, because I was talking about the ability to just run a zero prep game. But this person's running the 5 banners campaign frame, which is, it's like a political intrigue, Game of Thrones style, lots of moving parts game. Made me realize, there's no way I think you could run a zero prep game with this. But even this person says that he spent 4 hours prepping for the very start, and he still, does a bunch of prep before every game, but it's nowhere near as much as he would be doing for D&D. And I think I agree with him there. Okay, let's look at this one. The people making Daggerheart are extremely passionate and they want to make a great game. True. I just wish it were a good game. I am happy you like it. For me, it is just too fiddly. Not a fan of cards or hope and fear. The main complaints I've gotten with it are the action system. Too many introverts will just let other people take the initiative and the spotlight because they don't want to be assertive or speak up, so they don't really get to do much. Whereas in a game of D&D, you are guaranteed a turn. Okay, so this is actually a really good comment. I really like it, and this is kind of what I want. The only issue is that just the comment when you say, I just wish it were a good game. It is a good game. And I feel like you kind of acknowledge that. Daggerheart extremely passionate about making a good game, and you're glad I enjoy it. It's weird to say that it's a bad game when other people are enjoying it. It's weird to be like both those things. It can be a good game, but not a game you enjoy, is what I'm saying. But I think you're kind of, complaints about it, that it's just too fiddly, that you're not a fan of the cards or the hope and fear. I think are kind of fair complaints. That's kind of what's going to, differentiate people who like it and don't like it. I really like all the resources going around. I think it's just more interesting from moment to moment and balances out the more improvisational nature of the game with I can't just do anything I want. I have all these resources that I have to deal with first. But I totally get if people don't really like using the cards too much and they think there's too much stuff resource-wise. As for the too many introverts will just let other people take the initiative and the spotlight because they don't want to be assertive or speak up, so they don't really get to do much. Whereas in a game like D&D, you are guaranteed a turn. This is a comment and criticism I hear a lot of Daggerheart, but only from people who haven't played it that much. Genuinely, people who have played the game a handful of times, I think this is a non-point anymore. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but if you have a load of introverts in your game and they're all scared to take the spotlight because they don't want to be assertive or speak up, I presume they don't do anything in the game. Like, how do they do anything? If you ask them, like, the example I always use is the classic, okay, you start in a tavern, this thing happens, what do you do? Are they all dead silent? Like, how does that work? Because if you can master getting people to take turns outside of combat, you can master getting them to take turns inside of Daggerheart combat too. And here's something I've just come up with now and never really thought about before, but kind of, helping your players get used to there being no initiative and being generous to one another and taking turns and not being jerks will make them better at doing that outside of combat too. It will just make the general game better. But I don't believe it's personally an issue. And if it is an issue, the game has optional rules to counter that. No problem. So I've had a bunch of people asking for more Daggerheart content. Well, you're getting it. This person says, not a huge fan of Daggerheart, but watched the whole video to gain more perspective. Well, I'm still not completely convinced on Daggerheart. I still do appreciate your input and thoughts on the system. Look, if someone says they just don't like the game, I can't, convince them otherwise. I just don't like this idea that we're spreading people saying it's like a bad game, don't play it. Right, which I've seen from a fair few comments. Let's see if we can find some more criticisms that we can talk about. Is the camera tilted? You know what? It is. Hopefully, once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's not that obvious. You've got a good eye, Thomas, but my tripod is a piece of crap, is what that comes down to. Look, I know, I need a tripod. I need a new mic arm. I want better lighting. I'm working on it, okay? Still on the fence about diving into Daggerheart, but glad your ability to prep on the fly works out well with Daggerheart. Is it still okay to prep situations, NPCs, rather than plots if you have an idea to run, or do you get more player input and work from that? Honestly, you can prep as much as you enjoy prepping. If you want to tell a really set-in-stone world, then you can totally prep. You can totally prep situations and NPCs and plots. You can prep all of it. In fact, I would go as far to say that you probably should. I'm not saying that you always do a zero prep game. I'm just saying that it's possible to do that. And anything in between that and, a large prep session. So it's just, the prep is way more customizable to how much time and energy you have, is kind of what I mean by that, which is really nice. And in fact, I replied to this, don't remember what I said. I'll prep NPCs and situations in a similar way to D&D when I enjoy it, but if I don't have the time or energy, I'm much more comfortable winging it than I am in D&D. Exactly. Yuffie, I got recommended this after watching another GM 1 year later review after a year and they hated it. Yeah, I'm going to watch that soon. 625. I hear everyone saying that you have to convince the GM to use the experience, but the book says on page 93, right side, that you, the player, have final say within reason over whether your experience applies. Yeah, it's the within reason part. It's the within reason part where I say you have to convince the GM. I guess that could be on the player has final say within reason, but I certainly play it that, the GM has the final say on all these things. And the GM decides what's within reason. Yeah, there are other parts of the core rulebook that say that the GM is completely, in charge of what happens and players aren't. So that, voids, anything like this, honestly. It's kind of sometimes abilities will just say something like, spend a hope to do this thing. And that just doing that thing would be impossible in that situation, but a player might still be like, but it says spend a hope and I do it. So I do it, right? It says spend a hope and do it. And I'm like, tell me how you do it in this situation. I think you always have to convince the DM to do anything because the DM is look at me, I keep saying DM instead of GM, god damn it, I'm brainwashed. But yeah, the GM is in complete control of that world and there might be things the player does not realize. So yeah, you got to convince the GM in my mind. Of everything. I saw this one. This one is interesting. I ran Daggerheart using the physical box set for the first time the other weekend. We were actually disappointed that there weren't more cards involved. We weren't expecting to have to print out character sheets, honestly. I feel like having all these decks of cards kind of comes with a promise that your character sheet was going to be a hand of cards. This comment made me rethink some things. I think I agree with them. When I bought my first Daggerheart core rulebook stuff, it was the limited edition and it came with character sheets. So my experience of first playing Daggerheart was, okay, here's everyone's character sheets, here's everyone's cards, let's go. And it was like a complete thing. I think if you were just in a game store and you were more used to board games than TTRPGs, you might think you could just grab this box set, get some cards and play. That is not the case. This game is more TTRPG than it is board game by far. And it's not an issue with the game, but I hope the idea of that kind of spreads around so that more people aren't disappointed, because I can totally see someone buying it and being like, guys, I got this new game, let's play it. And then realizing that they have to like print out a bunch of stuff or get like a laptop and play off there or something like that. But I'm also sure that kind of happens with like other TTRPGs like D&D for brand new people who buy the core rulebooks and are like, okay, I think we just can play this. But no, you need dice, you need character sheets, you need to fill out this stuff, you need knowledge. So I'm sorry you went through that. It does feel worse with Daggerheart because it does have that kind of board game vibe to it. Would love to see a video on these session questions that got the players joining in on the world building. Yes, they're so good. I want to make different versions of them myself. I'm going to do a video on that soon. What the game lacks to be a 10 out of 10 is, in my opinion, a support to new groups making the game their own. Wait, what? The book screams in every page, DIY, DIY, and for veterans, it is a bliss. You don't like loose background, make a classic skill list. You don't like loose initiative, make it more tight one, and so on. My only complaint about the system is for those rules that are hard-coded, and I wish they were different to be easier to customize like the rest of the system, like the complexity of the HP armor threshold system, and how often... Sorry, that was the end of the comment. And how often complication arises from rolls. After that after a while start feeling unnatural. Yeah. So these are the core mechanics of the game. The hope and fear dice and the kind of HP threshold system are built into the game at every level. And if you don't like those things, I would say you won't enjoy Daggerheart. And going into this trying to change those, I think isn't smart. Like, it's a lot of wasted effort when there are other games out there you would prefer. And there's a few comments in here as well. I don't know if I'll get to them, but I have seen some people say stuff like, yeah, I like the game, but I don't use hope and fear dice in the way that the core rulebook says we should. Like, for example, I don't give a complication every time someone rolls with fear. I just get a fear point. I've seen other people say, like, we don't even do hope points. We just allow things to happen. And I don't want to say, that's not how you play the game, because you just keep doing whatever you and your players find fun. And if it's working for you, that's great for you. But it's a certain point where you change enough of those things and the enjoyment of other parts of the game fall apart a little bit. Like, Daggerheart to me is such a narrative game, and I know that is such like a buzzword and doesn't really make sense on its own. I guess by narrative, I mean you're there to like tell an interesting and compelling story with your friends, first and foremost. And a lot of these mechanics, like the hope and fear, when someone rolls with fear, you add a consequence, it makes the game feel more like, and this sounds pretentious, but more like a movie script, or more like reading a novel where we kind of learned for, thousands of years how to like lay out a good story, and those little complications and twists and things universally just make for a better story. So the second you kind of take that out of the equation, you can still have fun with the game, but I wonder why you're taking that out of the equation. I know a lot of people don't like adding a fear complication every time someone rolls with fear, just because maybe they can't think of something in that moment. And that's fine. I've certainly skipped adding complications. Usually I like hold off on them. I like say, I'm going to add this complication in a minute. And then a lot of the time, if I can't think of anything good, I'll just say, the complication is that, lightning strikes outside, things get spookier or whatever. Daggerheart to me feels incredibly well balanced. And the idea that every time someone rolls with fear, that person is either going to take a stress because of some complication, or the scene's going to get a little bit more difficult, causing potentially other people to spend resources to get out of the situation, just means that more resources are being spent in general, which makes for the game being more balanced and exciting down the line. And there's a lot of just minor things like that, where if you play it too differently to, how it's kind of written, I think you will find the game just being like too easy for the players, for example. I do also think that there is, certainly for newer GMs, it was something that I've had to deal with as well. there is kind of a weird thing, and this will be my last point in this video because it's going to be long, I think, and I don't want it to be too long. I'll talk about more of this on the stream that's happening right now. But a lot of people who struggle with like adding consequences when people roll with fear, or like don't like the constant resources happening, I think you're rolling too much. The Daggerheart is not made like D&D, where a player is rolling like every 2 minutes. And that, honestly, when I first started playing, I didn't like that because my players like rolling in D&D. I like them rolling. It gives them something to do. It gives me something to kind of facilitate often. And, you know, the game feels more like a game than that kind of improvisational storytelling situation. And there's a lot of advice out there, even in D&D, that is like, don't roll too often. You know, don't roll too much. Just like keep the story going, keep the pace going. Actually, when you stop to roll the dice, it kind of takes people out of whatever is happening a little bit. And that's a really good criticism of Daggerheart. If you are someone who likes rolling dice a lot, maybe Daggerheart isn't a system for you, because if you roll dice a lot in Daggerheart, like you could be adding so many consequences. You would have to like come up with so much stuff, and the story could go wildly, you know, out of control. Maybe you like that though, but if you don't, then yeah, avoid Daggerheart. But I have found personally being scared of rolling less for like a myriad of reasons. But since playing Daggerheart, I've not decided to roll less. I've not made that decision. I've just started rolling less, like getting my players to roll less, and it really has led to these rolls being so much more impactful when they do roll. Like, it's the feeling of like that one roll is worth 7 D&D rolls. So you only have to do it, 1/7 of the time. But Daggerheart also has a bunch of other stuff in there, spells and stuff, where it's just like, I spend a hope to do this thing, or the DM is spending fear to do things, or just making things happen. The players and the GM can both just make things happen. And because of that, the players are still doing stuff often and the GM's still doing stuff often. So it's not felt like people aren't rolling as much. It's actually just added more things to do between rolls. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you went from D&D to Daggerheart and whether you, you're the same. If you find that you are making your players roll less. But yeah, if you have an issue where you feel like you don't want to be adding consequences every time someone rolls with fear because it's just too much to handle, too much to think of, well, one, you have the option of like asking your players what they think would happen fear-wise. Players, in my experience, love adding to the narrative. It never occurred to me in D&D. I was like, I'm the GM. Like, they do not want to GM. The players have like asked me to do it, so they don't want any input in the story or the world or narrative at all. But the reality is they just don't want like the responsibility of it, and they prefer being a player, and they don't find a lot of like DMing, GMing fun to them. But then they still want, to have that creative input. They still want to add things. So it's kind of like really nice to open it up to them. I found some people think it's like, oh, you rely on the players to help you. It's like, no, I'm giving the players like an reward. Like, they want to help. They want to add to this story. Like, you as a DM, I presume, really enjoy coming up with this stuff and creating this world and these NPCs. So it makes sense that the players probably would too. Let them do it. But overall, yeah, if you are like, oh, I don't count fear, I don't add complications every time someone rolls with fear, then you might be rolling too much, in my opinion. Like, I find it more fun to roll less. Anyway, that's a long rant for the last one. Let me just see if there's any other ones that really stand out here. Where is it? I did see someone complain about Adversary stat blocks, saying that they are more complex than D&D stat blocks, and I went down a rabbit hole, when a comment really gets to you, and I actually pulled up like a new D&D stat block and a Daggerheart stat block, and I looked at them and I counted the information on there, right? And I think what most people have, the issue with Daggerheart stat blocks that people coming from D&D have, and it's the same with players who play a lot of D&D, it's the damage thresholds. It's the damage, looking at thresholds, and that converting into HP. It is that 3-step process. Technically a 1-step process. Like, here's the damage. Okay, it's this much HP. But there's kind of 3 numbers being thought about, and the thresholds have multiple numbers. So like, at first look, if you're brand new, thresholds can look like complex and unnecessary. But my God, I've not had one time in Daggerheart where I've not been able to do the maths in my head fast. The stat block I pulled up that I was looking at, I looked at a bunch of different ones, and one of them I pulled up had 77 HP in D&D, and the other one had 7 in Daggerheart, and I was like, okay. And I'm like, what if like a player could throw out like 33 damage, and I'd have to take it away from 77 damage. And there'll be some people out there who are very good at maths. I'm an idiot. You might do that like that, no issue. That's great for you. You might have a full table of people who are all mathematicians and can do it like that. And I'm going to get comments in this being like, this guy's an idiot. You don't have to be a mathematician to do that easy sum. But what I'm saying is that there will be some people who aren't very good at maths at your table, most probably. And for me, taking 3 away from 7 is much easier than 33 away from 77. It happens straight away. And yeah, I do have to like use a conversion table to see what the damage equates to health, sure. But I can say, once you do it a few times, it's insanely fast. It's so quick to do that. Apart from that, I think like Daggerheart in general has very simple stat blocks. And when I looked at the D&D stat blocks, I looked at like the 2014 versions as well, which a lot of people are still using. They are way more complex. Don't even get me started on them. The 2024 version stat blocks of D&D are a lot more simpler, but you have that insane block of numbers that is like all the different traits and modifiers of this D&D monster. There's so many numbers in there. If you just counted the numbers on the stat block from D&D and the stat block from Daggerheart, D&D is way more complex. But then I thought, I'm going to be fair here. I'm going to be fair and say, in the same way that I looked at Daggerheart and said the thresholds aren't that complex, the modifiers and stuff in D&D and the other extra stuff like, different speed and fly speed and all the different resistances and all that stuff, you won't be using them often. Like the things that you actually look for are this, and this. I pulled them both up and I really looked at them unbiased as a fan of both games, and they were about as complex as each other. And I will stand by that. And I might do a full video on it where I get the stat blocks up and we go through it. I don't know if like you guys like my D&D versus Daggerheart videos. And I know they're coming across like I'm choosing Daggerheart over D&D often just because of how passionate I'm talking about Daggerheart. I just like playing Daggerheart right now. I do still love D&D, but I would rather get out of those kind of videos and get more on this Daggerheart channel, more into just talking about like fun ways to play Daggerheart and ways that I found work for me that my players really love than this like divide. You know what, sorry, I did say it was the last one, but I do want to talk about this because it's a fun one to end on. It's a genuine question. Is Daggerheart deadlier than D&D? Or has my perception just been slanted because of Age of Umbra, where like a lot of people die a lot? And this is a genuine question because this person is wondering like if you can run a full campaign with a consistent set of characters, or would they, need to have multiple character sheets and should they expect to die? I think it's like D&D. In this scenario, it's not deadlier than D&D. Both games can be as deadly as you want them to be. If I had to like really analyze them, just play default and normal, I would say Daggerheart is deadlier. And I think that for a few reasons. The first one is that it's just very hard to actually fully kill someone in D&D. A lot of things have to go wrong. Like the GM has to actually take that person down, which is very hard with like all the other players and everything they can do. And once a player is down in D&D, they have to fail 3, maybe 2 if they're incredibly unlucky, but fail 3 saving throws. And each saving throw is like, you're more likely to succeed. Like statistically, you're more likely to succeed. So just getting to that point and not stabilizing yourself is statistically unlikely. But then because it's 2 or 3 rounds, and the round, like a round in D&D can take so long that just the chances of the combat finishing or a healer healing you or there being a health potion shoved down your throat is so high. Especially because like people are very aware when you're down, they see you're down and like they'll be doing everything in your power to get you back up. So it's just very hard to die to the point where I've never killed anyone in combat in D&D. I've been playing it for a very long time. I've killed people outside of combat, mostly deck of many things related. Well, in combat, it's just very hard to do unless you're playing a very deadly game. And I've never really played an incredibly deadly game. So very hard to die in D&D. In Daggerheart, players have a ton of resources that stop them from taking damage. But if the combat's long enough, they'll run out of those resources. And then eventually, if they take enough damage, they will go down. But the difference between D&D and Daggerheart is when they go down in Daggerheart, they're down. Like I would say most of the time, they're like dead, depending on the player. but the game has made dying incredibly fun and cool. I think most players are probably going to choose one of the death moves that there's a good chance will kill you. If not, they can choose just go unconscious option, which means that they won't die. Like if they really don't want a character to die, they choose the go unconscious option. But then the whole battle, rules as written, gets harder for all the other players, increasing the chance of a total party kill because they're one person down, no unconscious, and it got harder. So yeah, I would say it's deadlier in Daggerheart, but not by much. And in both D&D and Daggerheart, the GM has so much control over how difficult the fight is and how difficult the fight continues to be. So I kind of think it's a non-issue. I would say like they're very similar when it comes to deadliness. Oh, actually, sorry, one more. I've found Daggerheart encounters to be far more difficult to build because action economy is so volatile. My players hate blasting through fights without any challenge. Okay, you can make fights more challenging, but they are big min-max players. Okay, you should make fights more challenging. Made me realize that Codex is completely unbalanced and just head and shoulders above all other domains. Okay, the fireball abuse kind of ruined the game for me. Okay, so I mean, I don't want to take away from your lived experience here. It sounds like you just needed to make combat more challenging. I've had no issue having like really challenging combat in my games. And I don't really know what he means by saying the action economy is so volatile. So it's hard for me to like respond to this in a fair way. Because you're fundamentally saying that your players don't like it because they find combat too easy. And that someone who uses fireball is overpowered. That's kind of your complaints. Right? It's like combat's too easy, fireball is overpowered. Hold on, let me get the fireball spell up real quick. Okay, so this is the fireball spell. Make a spellcast roll against a target within very far range. That's pretty sweet. Yeah, very far range. Very good. On a success. So automatically, if I was thinking fireball was too powerful, I would just increase the difficulty of the adversaries I was throwing at them so they're more likely to fail. And if they fail this, the whole thing falls apart, right? But if they do succeed on that first check, they hurl a sphere of fire towards them that explodes on impact. The target and all creatures within very close range of them. So you can get around that by just not, putting enemies very close to each other. But they make a reaction roll. So there's another roll where if they then fail that, they will take, a lot of damage. I'll give you that, depending on your level, because your proficiency increases how many of these dice rolls you roll. But like most of the time, I would say they would be taking half damage, or the fireball just missed completely. So I don't know, man. I think most of your issues with the game just like come from you not making it difficult enough. But you did say that you found them to be more difficult to build, and I don't really get that. There's like a really good battle point system in the book that you can follow. That'll give you a rough estimate. And then if your players like stomp through that, then you just make that harder. And if they stomp through that, you make it a little bit harder. You'll get there. I heard that Daggerheart isn't a good system for long campaigns. What are your thoughts on this? No, it's a great system for long campaigns. I actually honestly prefer it for long campaigns because you're way more likely to run the full gambit and get max level. All right, I've got to finish this video because it's gone for way too long. I keep saying it's going to end. Thank you for watching. Come watch me stream. Let me know if you like these kind of videos. Bye.